and I look forward to the next. And we're also going to try recording this meeting just for folks who can't make it, since that's something that a lot of people have asked for. So we'll put this up online later. Cool. So what did we get done in the last 6 months? I think there's 4 big things that happened. One is the V2 identity contracts are out. So for those of you who haven't seen this yet, our contracts repo is live here. The deployed contracts are here. You can kind of interact with them. And all the identities, all the user data have been moved over to these contracts back in October. We plan to launch them on mainnet sometime later this year, but we'll talk about that once we get to the overview. The other thing that's ready is the hub prototype. Again, this is a very, very early prototype, but we've kind of got it to a place where it's working, and we've been able to stand it up and start sending messages to it. And it kind of, is still in a very rough state, but it works. And Paul and Aditya have been doing a bunch of great work, and Sagar as well. And you can also play around with this if you're so inclined. It's not quite in a stable state yet, but we have like a version of this that works and kind of proves out the delta graph model and all of the other stuff that we've been doing. The third thing is we also got a protocol spec done. So if you actually go to the protocol repo, we've updated a lot of the text here to go into the details of how the new protocol works, from the contracts to the hubs, and how they all fit together and how you can build applications. If you've been following along on these calls, probably nothing very surprising to you, but this doc kind of assembles them together in a nice readable manner. And if you don't like docs and you prefer videos, I've also been putting together this little video series on YouTube where we do these short 5-minute videos that covers each part of the spec with fun little diagrams. And so they kind of break it down and make it a little bit more bite-sized. This isn't complete yet. It covers like maybe 60% of the specs, so expect to see a few more videos pop up over the next few days. The last thing we launched, just in case folks haven't seen this yet, is the Merkle v2 APIs. So these are the APIs where you can publish messages to Merkle, and as the hubs get ready, Merkle will rebroadcast them over to the hubs. So if you want to get all your applications ready for going over to V2, this is a good set of APIs to be using to build your applications today. And once the hubs are ready, all these messages will automatically be transmitted over. Cool. Any questions on any of that stuff that I've covered so far?
Just one quick one. When it comes to sending messages to the API, like, will that always be the central point as far as hubs, and then they'll get rebroadcasted, or would that ever change in the future as far as like where we would want to send messages to?
So the way I think about it is, here, let me actually get like a little Scala draw going. There's sort of like 2 ways to think about hubs, right? I actually did this in one of the videos yesterday, but anyone can effectively run a hub, which is one of these little boxes down here, and anyone can fetch and receive messages directly from the hub. And some people building applications may want to talk directly to a hub. Like they may actually establish a connection that connects directly to a hub and sends messages back and forth. Now, this is a little bit of work, right? You got to set this up on AWS, you got to configure it. It's sort of like running your own Ethereum node. It's important to do if you want the independence and the decentralization and you want to have full control over it. But you can also imagine that there's a set of people that are, building a weekend project or just trying to mess around with Farcaster and see what's going on. And they might actually connect through an API. And this API sort of acts as a proxy to the server. And so this API provider says, hey, I'll do the hard work of running the hub and making sure the infra is up. And I'll just give you some like very simple APIs and you can talk to those. And so I think both of these will coexist. And you can think of the Merkle API as this piece today, where we're like, hey, when the hubs are online, we'll do the broadcasting. And if you want to keep using us, you can. But for developers who are, building something more long-term, who want like full decentralized control, we encourage them to set up their own hubs, run them, and broadcast messages to them. Does that answer the question?
Got it. Okay. Yeah. That seems like another example of like comparing it to a Web 2 paradigm of the like self-hosted download the software, compile it, versus the like managed solution that like does more of it for you, so you can get things up and running quicker.
That's exactly right.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Another analogy is the sort of what happens in Ethereum, where like this is sort of your equivalent of Infura. Somebody's running the nodes for you. You just call an HTTP API, whereas here you're running the node yourself on AWS and dealing with all the overhead.
All right. Okay. Cool.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay, great. I'll jump to this high-level overview. So we put this doc, and I've also shared this on Farcaster. So if you just go to my recent cast, you'll see a link to this doc, or you can get to it from the agenda doc here, which is in the calendar invite. But I won't go through all of this in great detail. There's actually a video explainer here that you can click on, and I did like a 5-minute walkthrough of this. But I'll kind of get to the salient points of like how we're thinking about the next 6 months at Farcaster. So the most important priority for us is we want to get to a place where we have credible neutrality in the eyes of all developers, right? And this means that you're not broadcasting stuff only to a Merkle API with a promise that they'll eventually get broadcast to the hubs. This means that you can run the hubs yourself and you'll actually be able to broadcast the messages directly and on your own. And so that's the main thing that we're focusing on for the next 6 months. The other target, and this is more from the Merkle side, is from the clients and the applications that we're building. We want to continue to increase the size of the network and grow. So we have, call it 1,500 daily active users today, and we want to get that number closer to around 5,000 daily active users. And so that's going to be another big focus for the client and the application team side of things. So in terms of like what's happening in Farcaster and what the roadmap is for the protocol, we sat down with the team and we put together like a very detailed plan on how we're going to get hubs shipped with a big focus on, we want to make sure that these deadlines are really, really tight, right? I think the last 6 months, honestly, our deadlines have been a little loosey-goosey and we're like, hey, Q4, and then come Q4, we didn't end up shipping. This time we're very serious about getting it right. And we want to make sure that these deadlines line up to what we're shipping. And so the first phase of the hubs, you can think of this as like, we've got a hub, it works really, really well, we fixed all the bugs, but there's only one of them, and Merkle's broadcasting messages to it. We expect that to be done by March 1st. And so we have this like fully robust, durable hub running. The focus from March to April is then going to be on getting about 10 hubs running. There's already a few people that have volunteered to do the initial hubs. And we're going to get these folks actually connected and broadcasting messages and testing out the peer-to-peer. And once we've had about a month of testing and validation done with that, we'll actually move to phase 4, where by May 1st, we can actually say, hey, everybody can download and run your own hub, and we're confident that the network will scale and you can actually broadcast messages. So those are the high-level deadlines that we're thinking about for the hubs. In terms of the contracts, we actually want to migrate them over to mainnet as well. So they're currently on Gurley and it's on testnet. And we actually want to move them over to mainnet. So you'll actually, be paying in actual ETH to do your registrations and all of this stuff, which is a big shift from where we are today. Aspirationally, we'd like to get that by June, but I think this is a lower confidence deadline and hence the dotted lines. So we'll keep you updated on this as we get closer to the date. But there's a chance that this happens a little later than currently planned. I'll pause there to see if anyone has questions on any of these timelines.
Yeah, just one really quick one on the audit. Is that like security audit of the contracts, or what would that be? Okay,
That's
cool. Okay.
Cool. I'll cover the second part here. So this is the Merkle roadmap, more of like what the client team is working on. There's 2 sections. I'll walk through the developer-facing section on the call today, and there's the user-facing section of the features that we're talking about, and that I've covered in the video. So if you guys are interested, you can watch the video and dig into like what's happening here. But I'll touch on kind of the big salient points which are up here. So the first thing that's missing from our developer experience is an API token request flow. So if you're building an application, you want the user to give you an API token to log in on their behalf. It's kind of a very clunky process. We have to get them to give you their seed phrase today, which is obviously not great. And we're going to have a nice OAuth-like flow where you can send a request. It opens up a notification in their app. They can see what permissions you're requesting and say, yes, I want to grant it. And then all of this kind of works automatically and you get like a nice webhook. I think Dan and Shane have already shared some plans previously on Farcaster about how this might work in some UI screenshots. And we're hoping to get that done by mid-February. We're doing planning with the team today, so this is like a rough deadline, and we'll get a more concrete deadline by early next week. But that's something we're excited to unlock for developers. The second thing that we're working on is supporting address rotation. And what that means is moving your address to a new, moving your FID and FNAME, your Farcaster ID and name to new addresses on the blockchain. Today, you can do that from like a blockchain perspective. It works great, but our client does a few funky things when that happens, and there's a few bugs and issues that we need to fix. So, technically, while it works on the protocol, people who've done it run into some issues while using the app. And so we need to go fix our apps up to make sure that we support all of these transfers correctly. And then the last big piece that we're working on is the signer request flow. So this is actually getting a delegate signer, which if you've been following the protocol, this is sort of like a lower level API token that lets you publish directly to hubs without having to go through the Merkle API. And that's going to happen closer to when the hubs launch, because obviously this is not very useful until the hubs launch. So we'll plan to have those ready right around when the hubs are available. The only other piece here in the user-facing that's worth touching on is the rebrand. So we're actually going to be moving away from the name Farcaster for the application itself, and we're going to be calling it something else. And the intent here is to have like a clear separation between what the protocol is, which is Farcaster, and the client that's being built, which is separate from Farcaster. And so there'll be clear delineation from website, application, all of that perspective. And we expect that to happen sometime in the next couple of months, mostly waiting on like some trademark and legal stuff to get done. So this may happen a little sooner or a little later than anticipated. Cool. Again, I'll pause here if folks have questions or comments on any of this stuff.
Yeah, maybe one thing, and like, sorry to be monopolizing question time.
No, it's all good.
So for the invite system, like just thinking, with more client diversity than there is today, like, are you guys like at all concerned about different clients handling invites differently, as far as maybe being a bit more liberal than you guys are now? Or like, would this be in a like public, anyone can sign up, there's like no more invites? I guess, yeah, like that's just kind of one of the things that's been top of mind for me, is that I think as like client diversity increases, and like I really think clients will be communities, basically, that like there should be, I think, kind of a separation between like protocol wide North Stars and like what clients can kind of influence. But yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah, so let me actually give a quick walkthrough of how we're thinking about just like access to the protocol and access to the clients. So the way it works right now is we've kind of limited both, right? We've said that, hey, to get access to the protocol or to get access to the clients, you have to go through this invite flow. And the reason for that is it's helped solve, it's helped avoid a bunch of problems like bots and fake signups and so on. And while we can build out these actual systems that solve for things. So from now until we get to mainnet, invitations are going to, the process for getting onto the protocol is like approximately the same from the protocol perspective, which is both getting a name and an ID is controlled by Farcaster, and you have to get an invite from somebody in order to get onto the network. After we get on mainnet, that's going to change. What we're actually going to say is like, hey, getting an ID, just an FID, that's going to be open, and anyone can come and get an FID. F names are still going to be controlled for a while. So there's going to be a period while we're testing things out on mainnet where we say, hey, we still have some sort of control over the F name process. And then at some point in the future, we want everything to be permissionless, right? We want like no individual client or team or anybody to have any control over this, but we want to make sure we have the systems in place to deal with bots, to deal with spam, to deal with all of those issues that will inevitably come. Now, the invite system kind of happening here, what this means is while we're in this phase where everything is still invite only, currently the invite system is, DM Dan on Twitter. And obviously that doesn't scale forever, right? And what we want to do here is actually leverage folks in the community who want to bring in other users that they like. So the way this invite system is going to work while we're in this broader protocol invite phase is we can now assign invites out to users. You can go and bring in folks to the network. And if you end up bringing in a lot of folks who are active and participating on the network, you get more invites and you can continue to bring in more folks. And so this actually like scales out the system and gives people the ability to bring in their friends and bring in other people to the protocol as we scale. Anything you wanted to add on that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, like here's a really basic example. We've had a couple of instances in different versions of this where like we were a little bit more permissive with invites in a given week. And even like, for example, my Google form where people put things down, we just get a ton of people who immediately start to squat. They like register JP Morgan, Google, like it's so if we get more permissive without really thinking this through, we're just going to spend a ton of time dealing with squatting. And from our point of view, we'd rather be pragmatic and preserve the value of the namespace in terms of like it actually being legit versus kind of just like moving to a kind of permissionless preemptively or like too prematurely. And then having to just spend a lot of time dealing with like, is this the real JP Morgan or not? Like, and we don't even have brand accounts right now. Like we're trying to kind of figure out a long-term solution for that. But I think just generally, it's like it's worked so far, and so for us, it's like let's approach this problem as we get closer to mainnet rather than trying to solve it too early now.
Yeah, that's really comforting, Dan, because like I think that's the thing that would sink the like Farcaster, I don't know if you want to call it vibe or like values or like whatever right now, because yeah, like I've seen some of those, and like if I didn't already know, Farcaster was a really good place for community, I would like look at that and be like, oh, so Farcaster is like BitCloud. It's like people squatting on, these like names, this is like not a place for me. And yeah, like I think you know, the downside is obviously the like impact to you and like your time, but I think growing it more like intentionally like this has like preserved the, I don't know if like social capital is the right word, but like social value of it over like other places to like spend your time. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah, and just like one way to check this out is if you go to other social networks that are kind of more decentralized oriented, and you just look at popular accounts there and you look at the replies. There are a lot of like reply bots that are just there clearly trying to get on-chain representation for some anticipation that like type of activity provides value. And so it's like really, really low quality. It's just like yes or like good. You don't see that on Farcaster, and partially the reason is we've been really tight with invites.
Totally. Cool. Thanks, guys. And also, I just want to say it was really cool to see Dan slide into your frame there, Varun. So maybe do that once. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Sweet. Any other questions?
Yeah. So like, what is the App Store thing?
Oh, so right now the apps are in test flight. Like on iOS, it's on test flight, and on Android, it's like this like Google Play Store beta thing. So we actually just want to make it so that you can download it straight from the App Store. One, because we're actually running out of slots in test flight. Like you can only have 10,000 users, and we're getting closer and closer to that number. So we just want to make it so anyone can go to the App Store, download the app, and there's just a bunch of like tactical stuff we need to do in order to get that launch ready.
Oh, I thought like a Farcaster apps thing. Yeah, I actually like one thing. If like I could add one thing, like open sourcing the like feeds, like queries and stuff, like that will be like super cool. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think in terms of like the feeds and how we're structured, just to make sure I understand the question, this is about like how we generate the feed at Farcaster.
Yeah, like mainly the code that's like you know, if someone like would launch like client, they just be able like to run GitHub repo or something like that, and like not handle complexity of like queries for the feeds and stuff.
Yeah, I think we have to think about like how to do that in a structured way, because right now a lot of that is tied to our specific implementation of our database. And so if you looked at that query, Shane's written this, and it's probably just like, 30 lines of SQL joining a bunch of things from tables with like confusing names. And so a lot of times like the queries end up being very low level database constructs that are more indicative of how we've chosen to organize data. And if you use a slightly different database, it's not very helpful for you to take those queries and do anything interesting with it. I think there's an interesting question of like, how can you represent the abstraction to make it easy for like somebody new to be able to generate a feed? And I think it's a problem we want to think about. But I think like if we were to just open source like our SQL code today, that's not going to end up being very helpful for most people building their own applications, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think like there was a good someone brought up, and maybe it's on the call, like, hey, maybe the community can help with the web client. And while I'm really excited that people actually want to be spending time working on something related to Farcaster, I think there's like the sentiment is really great, but the practical reality, and like a lot of us have actually worked at Coinbase, so we know about this stuff, but it's just like the ongoing maintenance of an application is the actual like really hard part. And so thinking through the architecture up front so that you can actually maintain a kind of world-class web application with a small team, like that's where the really challenging stuff is. And so one of the reasons I think we're just trying to be deliberate about it is, and we've been clear about this, is we're trying to hire someone who's basically built like a Coinbase or greater level web application and can just like avoid the 25 different potholes that you would hit in terms of just trying to iteratively scale. Whereas if we can launch that in the right way, I actually think it dramatically improves the speed at which we can ship new features. Versus if we kind of try to just get something out quick and dirty, we're going to end up spending a ton of time refactoring it. And we've already seen this with our Electron client. Varun and I are the original authors of that, and there's a lot of tech debt from just having kind of like gotten something quick and dirty out, and we still deal with today.
They'll just keep sliding it out as we go. Cool. Any other questions on the features or some of the dev things that we talked about?
Yeah, I have one on the OAuth client or flow, Varun. I was just curious, like, because you mentioned that apps would have to request for certain permissions. Like, is that going to be by action, like to cast on behalf of the user, follow, that kind of thing? Or do you know how that's going to work yet?
So the first version of this, the version that's going to come out on Feb 15th is probably going to be just like write permissions. So it's like very simple. It's like, hey, once you get the token, you can do all writes. Over time, I think we'll probably add more granularity to that, where it becomes a little more like, you know how you see in like GitHub and in Google, when you do the authentication, you can request specific permissions. And so there might be certain things that say like, hey, I only want to be able to like things or cast things and so on. But the first version of this will be, hey, this is just a write token and you can write everything that you want to.
Tell me if you guys can see that I just posted in the chat. It's like a mock-up of like what it would look like. And it won't say connect with Farcaster, probably it would actually be our client name just because it was specific to our API. But yeah.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I appreciate you prioritizing it, because given my thread yesterday, it seems like users are having a little bit of trouble with the current flow and understanding that. So it'd be really awesome when that comes out.
Yeah, I think like to step back, which Varun mentioned in the doc and in the videos, we are really trying to put as much time and effort in, especially the first half of this year, in getting to credible neutrality. And for us, credible neutrality is defined as hubs, like actually permissionless, mainnet, because like we can talk all we want about like this, but if we're running on testnet, it just kind of feels gimmicky. And then actually making it so that developers have a reasonable UX for starting with Merkle API tokens, but then eventually delegate keys, and getting to a place where now you can permissionlessly build something cool on Farcaster. We're still going to have the gated in onboarding, like that's like a second half of 2023 to solve for. But I think if we can get those first three things that I mentioned in a really good place and a quality bar that we're happy with, I think it's going to be a really good second half of the year for the ecosystem. I mean, I think people are going to be building like right now, like all of you, but just getting those three foundational pillars there, I think really allows us to start seeing some acceleration and people willing to commit building like more substantial, like potentially building real businesses, because they know that they can't have the rug pulled out from under them. And so we need to earn that level of trust from a protocol standpoint.
Cool. And then post this link here. I know this looks like something that will steal your crypto wallet, but this actually links to the correct mockups for what we're doing. Rajiv, I know you asked about tests for hub implementation. So we're probably going to end up building like an acceptance testing suite for our hub as we're getting there. And that's going to validate that we work to spec. So ideally, it's something that you can kind of just take and plug into like a different implementation and validate that it works. But we're still early in building that. But we're probably going to have to do it for ourselves. And so it'll be open source and anyone can use it. Cool. Couple of other quick things. One is we actually have also made public the sprint board and the actual set of tickets that will go into like getting hubs launched. So you can actually come here, and I'm just going to expand this a little bit, and you can see what all the tickets people are working on, what the milestones are, and if we're going a little too slowly, you can jump into the tickets and yell at us, or even better, you can come help us and get some of these things over the finish line. So this is all the stuff that needs to happen to get V2 of the hubs launched, and they're split by phase. So you can see what needs to happen for phase 2 and what needs to happen for phase 3 over here. The last thing, there's also a bunch of stuff we could use your help on. So we've actually done a little bit of work in tagging a lot of these issues. Some of them are simple and you can get started. Some of them are a little more nuanced. But there's a bunch of tickets in here. We've tried to add a lot of details. And so if you want to contribute to the hubs and get a little PR, there's stuff that ranging from, you know, an hour or two worth of work to stuff that's quite meaty and might take a couple of days. So if you're ever interested in diving in, we would love to get your PRs and are happy to help you get stuff merged in. Cool. That brings us to the end of all that I wanted to talk about today. Again, we'll open it up for more general questions, either on chat or on video. And if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
So I saw like in the hubs you're using this thing RuxDB. Are you like using the same database for the Merkle client?
No, so Paul actually worked a lot on RuxDB. So RuxDB is a very low level implementation of a data store, and it lets us like store data in a very concise and performant way. But you can think of it as a very low level database primitive, right? It's something that you can use to build other databases with. So like Ethereum, for example, if I remember correctly, Geth uses something similar. I think they use LevelsDB. But these are some of the lower underlying building blocks that let you build like efficient data storage systems.
Got you. So like in the future, like will it be expected that like clients like Merkle have like to run something similar, or like they can keep using like TypeRM and stuff
No,
like
you can
this?
use whatever data you want. The underlying data store inside the hub has no impact, has very little impact, I should say, on what actually happens. Like you can sort of think of the hub as it's a system that has an interface. It gives you messages over that interface, which is in flat buffers. And as long as you can read that, and you can put it into whatever database you want, Postgres, Mongo, CockroachDB, you know, whatever your flavor is today, you can kind of go insert your items into that database.
Got you.
It's also worth mentioning that we'll have packages and libraries so that you don't have to touch flat buffers either. Because that's been challenging to work with.
Yeah.
Even though it's
Yeah.
a big performance improvement for hubs, it's not worth the complexity like to have people trying to write flat buffers in clients.
Yeah, and that's a really good point that's worth touching on. As Paul said, like Paul's actually been working on this package that's going to make it super easy. Think of it as like, you know, ethers for Farcaster, where you can just include that in your code base and talk directly to a hub, and you can use like high-level JSON objects to send messages to the hub, and the package will do all the fancy work of converting them into these lower-level, very efficient representations and beaming them over to the hubs. And so as a developer, ideally, you never get exposed to any of that stuff, and you can kind of just deal with the higher level, you know, native JavaScript constructs. Cool. Awesome, folks. Well, thank you all for making the time. Oh, we have one more question. Will the FID migration to mainnet use the custody address? Looks like testnet doesn't do that. We plan to use I mean, we'll allow more, we'll share more details once we get close to the launch time. But the short answer is yes, we plan to use the same custody address to migrate your IDs over.
Wait, just to be clear, so it uses the custody address, which is the address that we generate in Farcaster client. It doesn't use your connected address, which I think we need to work on the terminology so that everyone understands this. But just to be clear, we are using the custody address currently on testnet, right?
Well, we changed the custody addresses between testnets, remember?
Right, but the zero index of your mnemonic is being used right now.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so to double check, like right now we are using your custody address. That's where your FID is. So if you go to the FID contracts and you query, where is my FID being held? It will be in the custody address, and it'll be the same way on mainnet.
So just to reiterate, custody address, just think of that as the mnemonic that we generate for Farcaster users when they sign up. We generate a new address. That's what we call the custody address. The thing that you connect with MetaMask or Rainbow or whatever, that is a connected address where you probably have your ENS or all of your NFTs. So those are two separate concepts. We are going to be using the custody address, which is Farcaster controlled and specifically our clients, not your connected address. Yeah, we are not going to put a connected address in, or the FID in the connected address. You would be free to move it there. That's actually one of the reasons we're doing the ability for you to rotate where your FID is. But one of the things that I think we have to think about is we're going to try to do the whole migration because we want to make sure all the FIDs are properly done and usernames. And so one of the reasons we're going to continue to onboard via Merkle, aka whatever we rebrand to, is then we can actually do in one fell swoop the whole migration and know that we are able to manage all the users. Is that consistent with what we're thinking?
That's right.
So post mainnet migration, I'd expect people to be like, oh, I actually don't want a new address. I'm comfortable putting it in my normal, you know, ENS. And so in that case, the concept of a connected address and a custody address become one and the same. But for right now, those are going to be really two separate things, at least the default experience in our clients. I know it's confusing and we can work on improving the kind of language around this long term. But I think for the foreseeable future, just think of a custody address as a Farcaster specific mnemonic and address that we use to do everything kind of on testnet.
One last quick question. Well, maybe not quick question, if you don't mind, Varun. Like, I think a big question to a lot of people is like what the long-term protocol governance looks like. Do you foresee it as always being done by Merkle Manufacturing in terms of like, you know, yeah, probably soliciting feedback via Farcaster, but at the end of the day, it's kind of your thing to decide on protocol matters, or do you ever see it moving to a W3C model where it's more of a like stakeholder kind of roundtable-ish kind of thing?
We've talked a lot about this. Dan, you want to take this one?
Sure. So not W3C, because I actually don't think that's a well-functioning organization. We can have a debate on Farcaster whether we think that is. But I do think that the whole goal here is build a protocol, and I don't think a protocol is controlled by a company. Like that's just like not a viable future. And so if we want to get to something that's internet scale, billion plus people using Farcaster as a protocol every day, whole bunch of instantiations of different types of apps and interfaces and all that kind of stuff, the governance of the protocol needs to be decentralized. But I think where Varun and I may have a slightly different opinion than the average, crypto Web3 team is our view is like, we need to actually get to a kind of like first public permissionless version that's great. And doing that by kind of decentralized governance, like our point of view is it just gets really, really hard. It's hard enough like doing something great, and it gets even harder if you're doing it decentralized. So you can kind of take a rough framework, and it's a terrible term, but like it's like useful in open source. So there's a term in open source, benevolent dictator for life, Storvalds. We are like benevolent company for the first couple of years to try to get something great out. And then once we've actually gotten something great out, successfully moved to mainnet, have permissionless signups, like all of these milestones, then I think we start shifting the focus on, okay, how do we actually take the control of the protocol from a core group of people in Merkle manufacturing and actually set up a system that is sustainable long-term, that is centralized. Because that's the other thing is like, if you think about Bitcoin, I don't know how many Bitcoin maxis we have on the chat, but like basically Bitcoin doesn't have a real governance structure. And like, you could argue that like a lot of the lack of improvement to that protocol, whether you think that's good or bad, as a result of not actually having put time and thought and effort into how to make it decentralized. So I think what we want to do is we want to get the best benefits of something like a Bitcoin or Ethereum, where there's credible neutrality, decentralization, and security. But at the same time, think through the latest of like, what are the most effective decentralized governance organizations that are out there or approaches. And this is actually something I think Vitalik probably will be a great input for, because he spends a lot of time thinking about this kind of stuff. But I don't want to overpromise it being like, hey, by the end of June, like Farcaster governance is going to be decentralized. Like for us, it's a sequential process towards the only thing that matters is getting something out that people are actually using and developers are using. And then kind of continuing to earn the trust of saying like, hey, we're building a protocol, and the protocol only wins if it's actually decentralized from a governance standpoint. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's how we think about it.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, Dan. It's really good to hear you say that, because yeah, I was like, that's kind of where my thoughts are too, that like, yeah, like as a protocol, it doesn't make sense for like to like control it forever. But in terms of practically getting a product out and getting user adoption, like you can build the world's best like governance structure, but if no one's using your protocol, then it kind of doesn't matter. So that's that's a really good answer. Thank you.
That's actually, that last point is the like deeply held belief we have is like, if we can get up to 100,000 DAU for the protocol, like while Merkle is still pretty much like controlling the pace of which the protocol is being developed, I can promise you people, assuming they believe that we actually mean what we say, they're going to build on top of it, because the only thing that really matters is engaged users. And I think that is the first focus is like continue to do all that. So build something great, get people to use it, with the kind of long-term aspiration of like, once we've hit some sufficient amount of scale, then shift the effort to really thinking through a long-term viable structure for governance.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Thanks for the great questions.
Of course.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, folks. We'll have another one of these 2 weeks from now. I posted the calendar invite and the recurring calendar invite in the Zoom link in Farcaster, so you can just add them to your calendar. And we'll see you all here 2 weeks from today.